Good evening, and welcome to Newburg's Halloween Spooktacular. We decided that since we can't celebrate Halloween the way we normally do this year, that we do something a little bit different to help you celebrate the holidays at the end of October. So sit back and relax. We're going to have some songs, some music, we're going to have some creepy stories, and along with some extra silly videos, and you're going to take a walk with me. So without further ado, let's begin. You know, we humans have collected a lot of fears over the many thousands of years that we've been around. Fear of death, of hunger, fear of loneliness or illness, fear of poverty and pain, or simply not fitting in. So it's no wonder that along the way we've settled on some very unique ways of managing those fears. But while some folklore is about attracting good things, the vast majority of superstitions out there are different. They are beliefs designed to repel danger and suffering, either by watching for ominous signs or by actively tripping up the evil forces that might deliver the worst that life has to offer. Many of these superstitions have been with us for a very long time, and while some people believe in them, while others don't, it's undeniable that they tend to hold a certain kind of power over us, a power that has driven some people to the very edge of madness. Take, for example, the simple phrase, knock on wood. I think it's fair to say that just about everyone has heard that saying before. If you're worried about something bad happening, they say you just need to knock on wood, on something at least made of wood, to help ward it off. But few people realize just how old that superstition really is. One way to view this is to look at wood in its various cultures. For example, ancient Egyptians revered sycamore, while old Germanic tribes held ash in a place of high honor. And a lot of these cultures added to the uniqueness of these trees by suggesting that otherworldly spirits actually lived inside of them. While the ancient Greeks noticed how frequently lightning was attracted to oak trees, so they assumed that it was because Zeus had blessed those trees. Soon enough, whenever they boasted about something they hoped would come true, the Greeks would knock on an oak tree to catch Zeus's attention. It's a tradition that would be passed on to the Romans, then to the Britons. And that's why it's still present in most Western cultures today.
Dashing through the streets in our costumes bright and gay, to each house we go, laughing all the way. Halloween is here, making spirits bright. What fun it is to trick or treat and sing pumpkin carols tonight. Oh, pumpkin bells, ringing loud and clear. Oh, what fun, great
Another common superstition is the warning to never walk beneath a ladder, especially if someone is using it at the time. There are a lot of theories about where it originated, including the ancient Egyptian obsession with pyramids, but that's a tricky culture to dive into. Yes, leaning a ladder up against the wall does create a pyramid-shaped opening, but the ladder is also one of the sacred symbols of Nut, the Egyptian sky goddess. Other historians believe that the superstition regarding ladders actually comes from the early Christian church, because in order to nail Jesus to the cross, it was assumed that a ladder was used, making them symbols of death. But the most common theory points to the use of ladders in the execution of criminals by way of hanging. In many communities across Europe, there was no official gallows. Condemned criminals would simply climb to the top of a ladder where the noose would be fitted over their heads before stepping off into death. As a result, walking beneath that ladder is viewed by many as a journey into the same death and tragedy, to literally mingle with misery and sorrow. Right up there with walking under ladders is the folklore surrounding breaking mirrors. Now, many people will tell you that this particular superstition has everything to do with the expensive nature of mirrors. In fact, up until just a couple of centuries ago, mirrors were very expensive and rare, making the destruction of one a bad thing from a financial perspective. But the idea might just go back even farther. You've probably heard that the cells in your bodies get replaced every few years, but that's only partially true. It turns out different cells in the human body die off at different rates. For skin cells, it's about 2 to 4 weeks, while liver cells regenerate every 6 to 9 months. But it was the Romans who were the originators of this idea, and for them, it was all about 7. Essentially, if your reflection was damaged in some way, perhaps by dropping the bowl that a priest was using to scry your future, your current self would become damaged, and that damage would need to cycle out. Until that happened, they believed the person would face misfortune and bad health. Thus, 7 years bad luck.
With orange and black, fa la 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 la. Take along your goodie sack, fa la 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 la. Don we now our gay apparel, fa la 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 la. Troll the ancient pumpkin carol, fa la 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 la. See the great one rise before us, fa la 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 la. As we sing the pumpkin chorus, fa la 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 la. Follow him as he ascends, fa la la la. Join with true great pumpkin friends, fa la 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 la. Up in the pumpkin patch, witches pause. Out jumps the great one, hear the applause. Down through the rows with goodies and toys, all for his followers, Halloween joys. Haunt, 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 who wouldn't want? Haunt, 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 who wouldn't want to be in the pumpkin patch? Cheer, 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 waiting for the great one and being sincere.
It's just the kind of superstition that anyone can remember. As long as a person is able to count, they'd be able to watch for the signs. Danger, some believe, can be found in numbers. Now, most people have a favorite number. Maybe it represents a birthday or anniversary, or the number that you always use when playing the lottery. Numbers are everywhere. In school, home, all throughout our workplaces. So I can see why some might pick a favorite. But some believe that certain numbers have the opposite effect. There are a lot of people out there who have certain numbers that fill them with dread. They see them as omens of ill fortune or symbols of chaos, and avoid them at all costs. A good example is the number 4. Fear of the number 4 is most prominent in East Asia. It's thought to be bad luck to give presents in groups of 4. It's even left out of phone numbers and addresses. Why? Well, it turns out that in many East Asian languages, the words for 4 and death sound exactly alike. And that's an association that many people would like to avoid. But hands down, across the centuries and cultures, the most feared number of them all is 13. And for a long while, it was uncommon to find planes with a 13th row of seats, or a building with a 13th floor. But if there's one representative of our ancient fear of 13 that's as strong as ever, it's the infamous date, Friday the 13th. Now, the origins of Friday the 13th are complex, and some of that complexity, I'm sure, hides the true origins. Today, all we can do is make an educated guess, but whatever the roots are for the fear of the number 13, it's clear that for centuries, people believed it to be a dark omen that needed to be avoided at all costs. And ignoring the signs could invite all manner of misfortune and suffering and tragedy into a person's life. But few took that warning as seriously as one man in particular, and by judging by the events of his life, the accuracy of the folklore is terrifying. Arnold was born to play music. Maybe he inherited that from his mother, who worked as a piano teacher, or perhaps it was his father's work making shoes that instilled in him a desire to create things of his own. Either way, Arnold was practically born to rise above. That birth was in 1874 in the Austrian city of Vienna. It was the city of Mozart, Beethoven, and century upon century of the European love for the arts. So it should really be no surprise that Arnold started down the path towards music all through the late 1890s. He supported himself by writing the music for local operas, and like many people trying to break into a crowded scene, he supplemented his income with other related jobs like teaching music to younger students. He got married in 1881 and started a family. But then, like a lot of Europeans, in 1916, he served in World War I. Although unlike many, he managed to survive. And then life got busy all over again. In 1922, he published a book of music theory, and then a year later, his wife passed away. A year later after that, he married again and settled as an instructor at the Prussian Academy of Arts in Berlin. But during this time, there between 1926 and 1933, he watched as the political landscape slowly shifted in a terrifying direction. It took a year, but in 1934, he and his family moved out of the country, first landing in the UK before following employment opportunities to the United States to avoid Nazis. In 1935, he was living in California, where he took a job teaching music at UCLA. But Arnold also had a secret. He suffered from a lifelong fear of the number 13. He believed that his birth date, the 13th of September, hinted at dark consequences for his life, and he set out avoiding the number at all costs as long as he lived. If he traveled or stayed in a hotel, he refused any room on the 13th floor or that had the number 13 in the room number. The same if he was in a meeting in a tall building. But don't think this as a superficial thing, though. Arnold, all through his fear of 13, went even to him looking for a house to rent. He flat out refused to step inside a place because its address was 13 Pine Street. And we can even see his lifelong fear show up in his creative work. He composed an opera once called Moses and Aaron. But if you add up the number of letters and the proper spelling of that title, you get 13 characters. So instead, he spelled Aaron with one A rather than two. As he grew older, that fear only deepened. He was utterly convinced that his death would somehow be connected to 13 and did his best to avoid it whenever possible. Which is why in the year 1939 it was so tough for him, because that was the year he would have turned 65. And 65, if you do the math, is a multiple of 13. In a panic, he consulted an astrologer, but he was told not to worry. Yes, they told him 1939 would be dangerous, but it wouldn't be fatal. So he pushed his fears aside, focused on work, and even completed another symphony that year. I can't imagine he ever fully let it go, but at the very least, he refused to let it paralyze him. And he lived, however terrifying the number 13 might be, seemed to Arnold Schoenberg. He somehow slipped through its imaginary noose. Despite all the anxiety and stress, there might have been nothing to be afraid of. It was, after all, just a folklore. Yes, his fear of the number 13 might seem a bit irrational to most of us today, but if he truly believed that he was predicting his own future, all those choices look a bit more logical in retrospect. And after all, wouldn't you try to avoid death if you knew it was coming? Thankfully, Arnold survived the year 1939, 2 years later becoming a U.S. citizen. He would go on to publish more and continue to teach music theory for the rest of his life. But if he was at peace during all that time, it came crashing down in 1950 when a friend pointed something out to him. You see, on September 13th of that year, Arnold would turn 76, and 7 plus 6 is 13. Upon hearing it, it said that Arnold was stunned. Once the reality of it sank in, he fell into a depression. At some point in his 76th year, he believed he was going to pass away. By the summer of 1951, with only a couple months left in his 76th year, Arnold's health was failing. His breath had become more labored. His eyesight had begun to leave him. And over all of it, fear hovered like a cloud, driving him deeper and deeper into depression. What if death was truly on its way? According to his wife Gertrude, one night, mid-July, Arnold was confined to a bed, and a physician was there to look in on him. She glanced at the clock and noticed that it was close to midnight, and wondered if the worst was yet to come or somewhere behind them. Then the doctor stepped into the room and told her it was almost time. Gertrude and the physician were there at Arnold's side when he took his last breath minutes later, and amazingly, he died just as he believed he would, at the age of 76. But not only that, but that death arrived at 11:47 p.m., 13 minutes before midnight. And the date? It was Friday in July. Friday the 13th.
Working in the lab late one night, when my eyes beheld an eerie sight. For my monster from its slab began to rise, and suddenly, to my surprise, he did the monster mash. It was a graveyard smash. It caught on in a flash. He did the monster mash. From my laboratory in the castle east to the master bedroom where the vampires feast, the ghouls all came from their humble abode. jolt from my electrode. Then you can monster mash and do my graveyard smash. You'll catch on in a flash. Then you can monster mash. Impetuous young boy.
Oh, you better not shriek, you better not groan, you better not howl, you better not moan. Great pumpkin is coming to town. He's gonna find out from folks that he meets who deserves tricks and who deserves treats. Great pumpkin is coming to town. He'll search every pumpkin patch, haunted house far and near, to see if you've been spreading gloom or bringing lots of cheer. So you better not shriek, you better not groan, you better not howl, you better not groan. Great pumpkin is coming to town.
This brings us to the end of Newburg's Halloween Spooktacular. I hope you'd enjoyed yourself. I hope you liked the music and the stories. For all the talk that we've discussed tonight about fear, there's a lot right now to be afraid of. 2020 has been a scary year, if nothing else. But in the Bible, there's one thing that God says over and over. It's, do not be afraid. And oftentimes he adds on to that, do not be afraid, for I am with you. While we like to revel in spookiness and being scared on Halloween, we know ultimately as Christians that we don't have anything to be afraid of. Poverty, bad health, all those terrible things that we have superstitions to avoid, as the Bible says, none of that can actually separate us from the love of God in Jesus Christ. And even the thing that we tend to fear the most, death, isn't really that terrible of a thing. We believe that death is just the beginning, just a part to what will be an incredible journey into eternity with God. I think one of the most beautiful ways it's been put is by another Christian by the name of J.R. Tolkien. He wrote in his book Lord of the Rings through one of his characters, Gandalf, when the characters are at a time when it seems like death is inevitable. Talking to Pippin, he says, the journey doesn't end here. Death is just another path, one that we all must take. The gray rain curtain of this world rolls back, and all turns to silver glass. And then you see it. White shores, and beyond, a far green country under a swift sunrise. That isn't so bad. So, from all of us here at Newburg, happy Halloween. And remember that, despite there being a lot to be afraid of,